All right. Hello and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin. I was going to say the Hebrew Salkin, but it's only really doing it's not really doing my nickname very much justice. The Hebrew Hammer
No,
Salkin. No. And joining me today for the third and final time, just kidding. I had it in my head before we even started. I was like, I'm going to say that because it's going to be really funny. Now, joining me for the third time on this podcast is none other than Dave Whitley, aka the Iron Tamer. And that is not just a clever nickname. He has bent all sorts of different metal items, as well as destroyed other things that are not supposed to be easily destroyed with naught but his bare hands. And we're going to talk about destroying something else on this podcast. And I'm
nice.
not going to give it away just yet. I want to let Dave have the honor of doing that. Also, given that I know that he can destroy things very easily, I don't want to be on the wrong end of his paws. So we're going to kick that off momentarily. And I would like to point out, by the way, folks, that if you want to destroy weakness, I like that segue there.
That's good. That's good stuff.
And you want to destroy infirmity and lack of mobility and all this other stuff, you might like my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. Now, you might be thinking, oh, this is probably one of those hardcore challenges designed to just annihilate me. No, you would be wrong. It is all about gait pattern movements that are designed to help you move the way you were made, not the way you've decayed, and do that in conjunction, you like that, with
That
your
was good. Yeah.
with your regular training. So you do not have to put your regular workouts to the side. You can either do this as a beginner or a finisher to your workouts. A lot of people have told me that as they started doing that, they feel better, they look better, they lift harder, and they don't have to turn their training into a full-time job in order to get some results. So go to 9minutechallenge.com, get your own free copy. That is the number 9minutechallenge.com. So without further ado, Dave, welcome back to the podcast.
I am excited to be here, and greetings from cloudy Tennessee all the way over there to, I don't know what the weather's like in Tel Aviv, but greetings and hello. Fantastic.
Yes, we were chatting a little bit beforehand, and I have to say I'm very happy that I'm here now as opposed to Nebraska, which is where I reside as of the recording of this podcast, because the temperature is not that great in Nebraska, and I gather it's maybe not great in Tennessee, but it was like 67 degrees here today. So
It's mid 50s here, so we're good.
oh
It
well,
it doesn't get cold here the way it gets cold in Nebraska.
no, our winters like kill people and destroy
Yes.
pipes and other things like that. So it's a little bit more severe. But it's a small price to pay to live in the same state as Warren Buffett. Anyway, moving right along.
Moving right along.
Yes. Now, one of the things, you and I were talking about something earlier on, and folks, this is tangentially related. We're talking about eyesight because Dave is wearing some glasses. I have corrective lenses in the form of contacts. So I was joking that normally he doesn't wear glasses and I do, and so now we've changed our facial accoutrement that we have. And I was telling him that I was reading about, and I've had friends who've raved about it, systems that claim that they can improve your eyesight. And I made a comment that it doesn't make sense to me that, like, when the skeptics say, "Oh, you can't improve your eyesight." Like your eyesight, we're meant to believe that your eyesight can get worse, but it can't get better. It's like, where do we accept that anywhere else? Like, you can't get any stronger as you get older. You can only get weaker. You can't get healthier as you get older. You can only get sicker. You can't get richer as you get older. You can only get poorer. Like nobody else really accepts that kind of, myopic view of the world where everything has to degrade only and there's no chance for improvement. And I think it's a good segue into the topic of today's conversation, which is going to be how to improve and ultimately get rid of intergenerational trauma, because we've all heard people talk about how, well, this is just the way that I was raised. This is just who I am. My dad was like this. My grandpa was like this, and so on and so forth. And Dave, I know you've been doing a lot to counter this sort of a thing, and in fact, you've been working with people on it. And I want to get an idea about what exactly it is that it means, because I think we can maybe come to some sort of like a conclusion about what intergenerational trauma means. But what does it mean practically speaking, and how does it manifest itself?
Well, first, a little bit of backstory on this. Anyone who knows me, and I'm since been on here before, and before I ever came on your podcast, I'm sure that a lot of your people are people who know who I am as a result of all the health and fitness stuff. So, just a quick bringing everybody from there to where I am now. The quick version of it. I have always been, fascinated with how the mind works in relation to achieving goals and that sort of stuff, and got really involved in that a few years ago. And when I saw the parallels between how I was training my mind as a performing strongman to do things that, like you said earlier, destroying things that are not easily or supposed to be destroyed by bare hands. A lot of the visualization and mental rehearsal that went along with that. And it sort of evolved into this thing. And then I wrote a book, and then COVID hit, and all of the speaking and traveling that I was doing went away in 2020. And I'm like, well, I've been thinking of doing a online coaching with this. So this is a good time to pivot, which I did. And so for several years, I was working mostly one-on-one online with people to help them achieve goals and, manifest their desired life kind of stuff. And in the midst of all that, my son was born. And that had a huge impact on how I was approaching things. And very naturally, it sort of evolved into me shifting my focus to working with dads who are probably entrepreneurial and have gotten that part of their life together and understand how their mind works in relation to that, and have had a bit of success with that. And also physically fit or physically active and strong men, not strong man, but strong men who are dads. And they've, they're doing well, and they're crushing it in the gym, and they're doing well with their financial or business endeavors, their entrepreneurial endeavors. But then they have a small kid, and they have a baby, and they look around and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I have not, and it's, and anyone who has children can understand this. You hold this little baby and you're like, what am I supposed to do next? And kids don't come with an instruction manual. But everyone seems to have an opinion on how you should do things with kids. And so I had the idea that if using the same sort of mental training processes that allowed me to bend steel and rip decks of cards, and allowed me to have successful business, and allowed me to help other people do that same sort of thing, could help me and other people improve in all those areas, why wouldn't it work for figuring out the best way to make sure that my son is the best human that he can be? So very much like what we were talking about eyesight, how can I apply this idea from one place to another place that seems like it might not be related? And what that led me to was looking at how we develop as children. And I'm not a child psychologist. I'm not a child behavior expert. And as I explain all this, you'll see that it makes perfect sense that I can talk about this based on my own experience, because even though I'm not a child development expert, I am an expert on my child's development. So like everything else that I've done, I've taken my personal experience, I've seen what worked and what didn't work. I've improved the things that do work and discarded the things that don't, or amplify the things that do work and improve the things that don't. Whatever it is, it's all about what works, because you come up with an idea and you think, oh, that sounds stupid. Well, it's only stupid if it doesn't work, and if it works, it's brilliant, right? So I wound up in a spot where I'm very interested in how my son can not repeat the same mistakes that I made as I was growing up, and not have the same like limitations in his mind that I had growing up. Now, my parents did a fantastic job as far as being caring and providing for me and all that. I was not raised in any sort of abusive situation. I wasn't neglected, but around money, there was a lot of scarcity, a lot of lack. And we couple that with a very strong blue collar work ethic. So I was raised that the way to have money is you go out and you work really hard for someone else, and then you save it, and then you'll have something. Mm-hmm. Once I understood that that was not the most effective or most efficient way to sell my time to someone else. Is actually the worst way to accumulate any money. I was able to change those things. Health wise, I grew up, diabetes runs in my family. You know what else runs in my family is a love of biscuits and gravy and little Debbie cakes, right? And so there's a correlation there. And my parents broke out of that much later in life. Neither one of them ever had diabetes, but I look at my, other relatives on both sides of the family, and it's prevalent there. I'm like, how much of this is actual genetic predisposition, and how much of it is simply accepting that that's the way things are because I was taught that way? So looking at it through that lens on how do I make it so that my son gets to avoid these things, I started looking into how the brain and the mind develop from youth, not just as an adult. And I found out that those first 6 or 7 years of life, we're a sponge. We absorb information. We don't learn it. We see it, and we model it, and we do it. And like a really interesting example of that is how there's no off switch to that is we had to have plumber come over recently. My son, fascinated by this guy when he drives up in his van with the ladder on top and he's getting his tools out and stuff. My son just turned 4, for anyone who doesn't know. He's watching this guy who comes in, does some work. He goes back out to the truck to get some tools or to do something in the truck to continue the job. And while he's outside, he decides to have a smoke. So he's like, "Daddy, that man's smoking." And I'm like, "Yes, he is." That was all that was said about it. Well, a couple of days later, my son's walking around with a crayon going, "I'm smoking. This is my smoker." Didn't even know what to call it, but he was mimicking the behavior. And I said, "Well, that's kind of funny, dude." And because I've come to realize that if I make a big deal out of it, I don't want him to smoke. I don't want anybody to, really. But if I make a big deal out of it, then that makes it more enticing. But if I just say, "Oh, I like the way you're using your imagination there. That's funny," it very often will just kind of disappear and he'll move on to the next thing, right? So that kind of stuff got me thinking about it. But the thing that really put it over the edge for me in deciding that I'm going to take all my focus, all my attention, and direct it at dads. And you used the word generational trauma earlier. I rarely ever use that word because I feel like it is a bit limiting for what I do. When I think of trauma, I think of something really horrible happening to someone, either physically, mentally, whatever. I mean, like something really, really bad. It doesn't have to be really bad, although it can be, to approach it from the way that I'm doing it. So I use the term generational cycles of limited beliefs or unwanted thinking, that kind of stuff. Because if you've experienced trauma, my heart goes out to you. The wake of that typically affects someone's thought processes. So we have beliefs and ideas and concepts that we carry around that came about as a result of that. And can we improve vision as we get older? Probably. Can we eliminate or at least mitigate bad things that happened to us when we were younger so that they're not affecting us now? And the answer is absolutely yes. The thing that really solidified it for me, though, was I had a client that I was talking to, and he was, we were working on some wealth and mindset stuff around that. And he's very driven, very, very focused on achieving that. But we would periodically talk about his child and his family life and stuff too, because it all connects with each other. And I got on a call with him, checking in, "How you doing?" He's like, I'm not well. I'm not doing well at all. And I said, "Well, what's going on?" He says, "Well, yesterday I had promised my son," I think the son was like 5 or 6 years old at the time, maybe 7. He was like right around that age. I had promised him that I would go to his soccer game. Okay. Well, how was the soccer game? Well, I didn't go. Well, what happened? He was getting, and the story's long, so I'll shorten it as much as I can. He was getting up to leave the office. He was literally about to get up and walk out the door. And he got what he called, he did the quotes thing, an emergency email. Something came in that had to do with his business that he could have put off, but he decided, I can handle this right now and it'll be really quick and it won't affect anything. So he dives into it. Now he's committed to it and he's realizing it's going to take longer than he thought. You know, he's trying to cram one more little thing in there because he's driven to hit this financial goal. When he looks around and sees that he's not even going to make it home in time to leave again to go to the game, he calls his family, gets on the phone with his son, because he's promised his son, and he's valuing honesty as one of the traits that he wants his son to inherit. And he's valuing doing what you say you're going to do and following through with his son. So he calls him up and says, buddy, I'm sorry, I got stuck with something at work. I'm not going to be able to come to your soccer game. And the kid, he's expecting the kid to be upset. The kid was not upset. The kid was completely unaffected. And he says the kid looks at him on the FaceTime that he's doing, and he says, that's okay, Daddy. I'm used to it. You never come to any of my games. And then wanders off to do whatever the next thing is. And the guy said he was just absolutely gutted. He was just shook. He couldn't finish the work project. It just ripped him apart, you know, because when the idea is that I want to instill into my son that it's important to finish things you start and to carry through and to be a man of your word, that's a noble thing, right? Then to break a promise to him and to have his son reply with, well, that's what you always do. It was just devastating to him. So we started immediately, we removed the focus of what he and I were coaching about from the wealth mindset of stuff to how to be the dad that we want him to be. And what I wound up seeing was that a lot of the stuff that he said he wanted to instill in his son, he wasn't actually doing. And I had a very similar experience when we decided that we wanted to have a child. We had a very difficult time with all of it. We had to go to, you know, fertility clinics, and like, it was not just a simple, you know, go do the deed and then have the kid kind of thing. We went through a lot to get there. And so in a lot of ways that made it much more impactful to me because of having to go through that. And I'm like, okay, my wife's pregnant now. How do I want this kid to grow up? You know, what do I want him to believe? What do I have that I've gotten through or overcome that I don't want him to get? So I start, and my wife joined me in this too. We started just writing down ideas and concepts of qualities that we wanted to instill in him. And so I'm writing all this stuff down, and I've got this really cool list, and I'm like, this is awesome. And so I set it down and got away from it. I came back to it the next day, and I picked it up and I read it with fresh eyes objectively. And I'm like, probably half the stuff on this list, I am not up to task on, or I'm dropping the ball on completely. And then knowing that kids, that the idea of do what I say, not what I do as I say, not as I do, doesn't work ever in any situation, ever, for anybody. I'm like, he's going to model what I do far more than what I tell him to do. So I need to get my shit together as much as I can. And so I started working on my own processes with that. And I realized that there's all these beliefs and all these ideas that guide what we do subconsciously. And I decided that from the point of view that I was looking at it, I would call this an internal code. And the reason I chose that particular name for it is the word code. I'm a real big fan of the clarity with which we define something determines its usefulness, the quote from Tony Blauer. And so I decided, what does a code really mean? And so I look up the word code, and there's multiple definitions, and I chose 3 of them. The first one, and these are in no particular order, but the first one is a form of language that can be used in secret, right? And it doesn't have to be in secret. It can also be just kind of like jargon within a particular culture. Like if I start talking about swings and snatches and cleans on here, you know, if I say snatch on here, most people are going to know I'm talking about putting a kettlebell overhead in one motion. If I say it somewhere else, they might think that I'm talking about a vagina, right? If I say clean on here, I'm getting a kettlebell ready to press. If I say clean somewhere else, it might mean that it's not dirty, right? So there's a code involved in pretty much any little subculture. in the way that we speak to each other. So it's a secret language, right? That extends into our internal conversations. So how am I talking to myself about myself? And I've asked this question probably on every podcast or interview that I've done since I started doing this kind of work, is if you knew someone who spoke to you about you the way that you speak to yourself about yourself, is that person on your side, or are they a wall against you? And I realized that even though I had done a lot of stuff to get my own mind the way that I wanted it to be, there was still a lot going on in my inner conversations where I was being oppositional to myself in that part of my code. So the secret language is one part of the code. The second definition is like a computer program, right? There's a code, you hit go and the code runs itself and it does it automatically. And it's input, go through code, receive output. And you can change the input and you can change the code if you want to change the output. Right. So if we're inputting into a particular thought process of how we want things to be, that is oppositional to what our belief system is, we will act according to our belief system, not according to our conscious thought. And that's where we wind up with stuff like, I don't want to be this way, but this is just how I am. Right. And then the third part of it is the most literal, comes from the Latin root of codex, which means a book of laws. It's your own personal code of ethics that you live by, your own code of conduct, the laws by which you govern your life. And again, very few people ever sit down and say, these are my values, this is what I believe, and write it out. And even fewer people will write it out and then go back and analyze it to see if there are items on the list that are in direct opposition with each other. Case in point, we're back to parenting, right? Let's say that you value honesty and you value wealth and abundance, right? And you're trying to instill this into your kid. And the kid is 8 years old and you go to a restaurant where kids under 7 eat free. We're going to tell them that you're 7 so that we can save $12 on the buffet. Mm-hmm. Also, it's very important that you're always honest with me. Never lie. And that seems kind of benign, but they're directly in opposition with each other. Yeah. And when you consider that when children are born, they don't have a filtration system, like they can't differentiate between the two things, but they're not dumb either. They're not like I was brought up, oh, he's just a kid. He doesn't understand. He doesn't get it. Meanwhile, he's sitting over there absorbing it, right? Like, that's why we stopped watching TV in the same room with him when he was very little. Because, you know, if he's sitting there just at 6 months old staring around the room and I've got Walking Dead on, you know, zombies are going into his subconscious mind. He's absorbing it, whether I realize it, whether I mean it, whether I want him to or not, right? Mm-hmm. So sitting down, writing out that internal code, looking at it and saying, where am I actually working against myself here? And how can I clean all this up so that I'm being the man that I want to be for him, so that he can be the best man that he wants to be? That's kind of the root of the whole thing. And like I've done with every other thing that I've turned into an offering for people, I tested it on myself, tested it with my clients, and refine it. And it's in it's in the process now of where I've had a few guys that have come through this actual process and they're doing great with it. They're about 6 weeks into it. And I'm ready to take the next group of men into it. And I'm actually doing a workshop that goes into great detail about the process, the system, the backstory of it, some success stories from clients, that kind of stuff, on the 24th, which is Tuesday. Yeah, January 24th. I'm going to be doing a workshop there. And if anyone's interested in getting on board for that workshop, the way to register for it is go to advancingmanproject.com, and you can register there for it. And the workshop will be probably somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. And I'll allow time for question and answer at the end. We'll go as long as we need to, but it'll be a fairly in-depth overview of what the system looks like. And then at the end, if anybody's interested in working with me in the actual coaching program itself, there'll be an opportunity to explore that in a little more depth.
Excellent. And that's advancingmanproject.com.
That's correct. And for some reason,
yeah, go ahead.
For some reason, I typed or I had someone type advancingmanproject.com into their address bar, and it didn't work, but then they put the W's on the front of it and it did. So there may be some sort of technical glitch on that end, or it may have been a glitch on their end that didn't allow them to do that. So if you go there and it takes you to a dead page, put the W's on the front.
You know what I'll do is I'll put the link in the description, so that way people can make
And
sure
just
that
click it.
all they got to do is click, and they'll get right to it, because I know what that's like. This is one of the reasons actually why when I tell people to get my 9-minute challenge, I always say it's the number 9minutechallenge.com, because I had somebody reach out once like, yeah, I went to 9-minute challenge and I couldn't find it. I was like, okay, well, it looks to me like you spelled out the number, and that, that it changes everything. So we'll make sure that the working URL is in the description, and we'll be very happy to I'll be very happy to see people go to that, attend your workshop. I know it's going to be very good. One thing I wanted to mention, that as you were talking, I was thinking about this, because I see this happen so often. It's to me, it's sort of amazing that it goes over people's heads, but it's like when their kids do their kids do things how they do them, but they don't do what they do. They're like, they can't figure out, why is my kid doing this? And it's like, I think you're looking at it as though like, well, I've never done this. It's like, but is he or she following like a decision-making process where the details you can change and you can put in as you want, that you have been doing and they've watched you do for ages? Or is it really that far out of left field? I remember seeing a video a number of years ago, and at first, it's sort of strange to think about now, but at first I thought, yeah, this dad did exactly what he should have done. His daughter, I think, had been like, I think, I don't remember what it was, like disrespectful of their property or their house or something like that. And so what he did was he made a video which he posted on social media. It's like, that's strike number 1. Strikes number 2 and 3 come up next. And he talking to the audience as though he was talking to his daughter. He said that to teach her a lesson about not destroying other people's property or showing respect for people's property, he took her new laptop and shot it with his handgun. It's like, and then I remember thinking like, that'll teach her. This is many years ago. But I didn't know any better. I just thought like, that you got to fight fire with fire. And I read a comment, and in a rare moment of a social media comment actually being, insightful, somebody said, gee, I wonder where his daughter learned how to be disrespectful to other people's property. And I was like, oh my God, that's 100% spot on. Like I remember actually when I was a kid, like kids like to push buttons sometimes because they, like you said, they don't have a filter. So they're always kind of trying to figure out what they can get away with. And my dad used to carpool me and one of my neighbor friends to school. And for whatever reason, I was making fun of my dad. I don't remember what it was. And, I thought I was just being kind of funny, sort of like trying to make my friend laugh. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful to my dad. I thought it was just witty banter. And, he didn't say anything, drove us to school. And then later he told me when I got home, when I was by myself, he didn't say it in front of my friend. He said, you're grounded for a month for being disrespectful to me the way that you were in front of your friend. And he gave me an opportunity to shorten the grounding, but I was going to have to do something like it was extra chores or, maybe write an essay about why it's not okay to disrespect your parents like that. But the thing is, he didn't do it in front of my friend.
Right.
He didn't do it as a way of making me feel the kind of humiliation that I was making him feel. And I learned from that, that
that's good.
Yeah, that if you behave that way toward people, or if somebody does that to you, depending on the circumstances, if it's a loved one, I would say specifically, you're not going to make it any better by making them feel bad. So I learned from that, and I'm sure he demonstrated it many other times, but that one really stuck out to me. So contrast that with the way that a lot of other people do things, where again, they don't like what their kid is doing, and they're, rather than looking in the mirror, they are looking to, point fingers at the kid as though the kid just pulled this idea out of thin air, or or whatever it may be. So I can definitely say that I think that sort of a thing is extraordinarily important. And like you said, there's no instruction manual to raising a kid. It's you could be very successful in a lot of other areas in your life. And as you're pointing out here, you can have a very difficult time raising the kid the way that you want, specifically because a lot of the great qualities that you want to see in them, you can't yet see in yourself.
Right. Right. And one of the things that made it onto my list, similarly to what you're talking about, I have in the past been not just guilty of doing this, but like actually enjoying it and being quite good at it, of using insults or picking at someone as a way to just kind of carry on a conversation, or to show affection, even, like, I've heard people refer to their kids as a little shit, right? Like, oh, I love that little shit, and like, so you're literally calling your child fecal matter, as a way to express love. And so thinking about that kind of stuff, I'm like, you and I have had those kind of conversations before, right? Where we insult each other lovingly.
Absolutely. If I may, I remember actually once
does this involve a table full of chicken?
This was no, this was actually the weekend before that. Funnily enough, we were in it was at Minneapolis for the first ever flexible steel event.
Okay.
With John Ingham and whatever. And I remember we're sitting around a big table full of participants, and you were using that trademark with the waiter, but he was like right on top of it. So every time, you gave it was like a kind of dry Southern delivery. I remember he came over and you had some wine, and he said, "Sir, would you like another wine?" And you were like, "Well, it looks like there's a hole in this one, so I guess you better get me a new one," or something like that.
Yeah.
Very straight faced. And he says, "Oh, I hear you have a Southern accent. Maybe I should have asked you that question more slowly," or something like that. And you guys just went back and forth.
Yeah.
With the right person, you can definitely get away with it. But I totally think you're right. I mean, if you're calling your kid names like that, and you're even if it's meant in jest and you don't have any other bad things to say about the kid, kids know what it means. Like you said, they're not dumb. They internalize it, and they start to see themselves like that. And if you see yourself, your actions can't contradict the way that you see yourself.
Exactly. And one of the things that I wrote down on the list is I wanted to make sure that I instilled the idea of kindness and compassion and generosity to him, right? Because I think those are very important qualities that all of us could do better with, and so fast forward to a few weeks ago, he's 4 years old. It's Christmas morning. He wakes up somewhere between 5:45 and 6 a.m. Sun's starting to brighten the sky a little bit, but hasn't come over the horizon yet. He's in his Spider-Man pajamas doing cute little kid stuff. It's Christmas. And he comes out, and we turn the lights on, and we get the cameras ready and all that for the opening of the presents, because they're under the tree and all that. Now, he had gone with my wife to help her shop for some stuff for me. And he knew that some of the presents that were under there had my name on them. The very first thing he did once we got the lights turned on and set up was he went and grabbed a present that he knew was for me from underneath the tree, and he knew I was going to love it. He brought it over to me and he says, "I know you're going to love this. I want you to go first." 4-year-old kid on Christmas morning defers his own gifts that he knows he's going to love in order to generously hand his father a gift that he believes his father's going to love. And I'm like, well, Christmas is done here.
Yeah. This
is all I needed. And, we obviously went on and did the thing, but we got video of him. And he's like, it was, it's laying way over there somewhere out of frame. But it was like a leather journal, right, that I write in. And, he helped me open it, and he takes it out, and he's like, "Look, it's a new planner for you to write things down in." And I'm like, "It's awesome, buddy." And, so he was like so excited at the the event of giving someone something else and seeing them and seeing their joy in the receiving of it. Now, he's not like that all the time, but none of us are, right? But just for that moment of just absolute pure kind generosity, it's very gratifying to me to know that what I'm doing and what I'm modeling for him is taking root, you know. So very, very, very powerful moment for me right there. And he does that kind of stuff all the time. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's it's a great thing to see, because there's one thing that I think can turn any situation like that, where you're expecting some sort of a physical gift, into an even better situation, is to see that a more important and longer term plan of yours is starting to come to fruition, so that you know that the seeds that you're planting, you know, the routines that you're doing are actually bearing fruit. And now you got it. You know that you can keep going this direction. What you're doing is working. And to see it too at 4 years old, when kids are generally considered to be the most impetuous and, you know, me focused and what have you, that's got to be a great feeling.
It is. And I realize too that the act of generosity is actually a selfish thing. It's a self-motivated thing. Like, if I give you something because I know you're going to love it, you loving the thing that I give you makes me feel good. And so I'm giving it to you because it makes me feel good. And so that's, you know, that's one of the things that's going on in the internal code there. If I could just real quickly kind of talk about why it's called the Advancing Man Project and kind of what it's about a little bit there. The general idea is that I wanted to go, and model the things that I wanted him to embody as much as I possibly could. And so I had to sort of put together a framework with that, right? And I realized as I was writing my stuff out and working to get my own stuff together with that the first step in all that is knowing what's actually going on, right? To translate that into a comparison in the fitness world, like someone comes to you and like, hey, I really want to lose 30 pounds. And I'm working out pretty well. Can you hook me up on some nutritional advice? For me, what I would always do in that situation is I'd say, I don't want you to change anything for a week. Keep eating exactly the way you've been eating for a week, with the only exception being every time you sit down to eat or drink anything, or every time you go to put anything in your mouth, you don't have to sit down because you find out that people eat on the run, right? I want you to take out your phone, snap a photo of it, and text it to me. That's your only assignment. Do not change anything. Well, from quantum physics, we know that the very act of observing something changes it, right? So 3 or 4 days into that, I would get messages like, you know, I didn't even realize that every time I would walk past the candy bowl at the office around Halloween, I would grab a little Reese's cup or a Hershey's Kiss and pop it in my mouth. And the lady told me she did that 17 times in one day, walking past this thing. Because, but like, she would have never written that down in a food log. She was completely unaware of it, because it's not like I'm sitting down to this meal or like I have prepared these meals in advance. It was just, oh, look there, pop and boop, and then it's done. You know, you see it, you respond or you react to it, pop it in your mouth, you get that little dopamine hit, and then 3 minutes later, you don't even remember that you did it. And so being aware, uncritically observing what she was doing, she was able to be like, well, the first thing I probably ought to do is not that, right? Walk by without sticking my hand in it. That's what she said. Sorry.
Folks, if you're listening, listen to that again, and you will understand why it's so funny. And you'll understand too that this is the kind of rapport that Dave and I have. We just can't help ourselves. We have to say stuff like this.
Yes, it's acceptable in this environment.
Correct.
So the first thing that I encourage people to do is like uncritically observe what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're saying to yourself, particularly about yourself, and just notice it. Don't try to change it. Just notice it. And if you truly, truly observe it without attempting to change it, you'll notice that like most people, you are complaining a lot. You are criticizing a lot. You are comparing things that don't have any comparison to each other a lot. You are just continually feeding this mental diet of things that support an environment of hostility or of dissatisfaction, right? One of the guys that I worked with, after he did this, he realized how much he would just complain about things for no reason. We termed it recreational outrage. And it was complaining, criticizing, and comparing things that he really didn't know anything about, was like this recreational thing that he got a sense of justification out of. And I said, well, you know, there's a quote from a guy named Emmett Fox that says, criticism is indirect self-boasting. And what that means is, if you, like I witnessed this recently with some people talking about middle school basketball. And, well, I don't know why the coaches can't just do this, and why is the game got to be at that time? They should just do it this way. And essentially what you're saying there is, the person who's in charge doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. And if everyone would just listen to me, everything would be perfect, right? I know more about this thing, and I know this much of it, than you do, who does it for a living. And if we stop and look around, we can see examples of that in ourselves and in other people all day long. All day long. Well, if we're complaining and criticizing in an attempt to, and we're not even aware of it, that the fuel behind that is to feel superior. It's to feel better about myself. I don't really care if the situation changes. I just want to feel superior. I want to feel justified. Well, what can we do to feel superior and to feel justified that doesn't involve complaining? Well, we can actually look at changing ourselves rather than insisting that someone else should match up with what I think and what I believe, right? So the opposite of complaining is gratitude, but it's the same energy, right?
Absolutely.
So if I'm complaining about something, I'm actually, in a very real way, expressing satisfaction and receptivity of having that. So I'm literally being grateful for something that I don't want when I'm complaining. So I started just like looking at all these different things like that. I'm like, how can all this fit into this code? And went through a process of literally taking an old belief pattern, breaking it, and replacing it with something else. Because it's not enough to just not eat the candy when you walk by. If you're actually legitimately hungry, it would pay you to plan in advance to have something that is in line with your plan to eat, right? Rather than scavenging, right? But the belief systems that are scavenger like that, of just react, that represents like the lowest level of awareness that we can have mentally. Just the base animal survival reactive scavenger mentality. And if you don't know you're there, you don't know that you can get out, much less how to get out of it. And so that the whole workshop is called Operation Break and Replace, and it's at advancingmanproject.com. It's designed to show you the process of how I take you analyze a belief, you analyze a pattern, you analyze a concept that you've been carrying around and may not have even realized that you were doing it, much less why you were doing it, but you picked it up from somewhere along the way, and asking the question, does this serve me? Does this help me in any way? And most importantly, with this particular group of people, is this something that I want my children and their children and their children to embody? And if not, we break it and we replace it with something that fulfills that criteria.
Excellent.
And that's what we talk about.
And you know, one thing that what you talked about, sort of like same energy but different direction, very much reminds me of like what we were talking about with your son wanting to give you your gift first. He said, yeah, it's kindness, and it's an act of like, I don't know exactly what we said, like selflessness. Well, you pointed out
Generosity.
Generosity, yeah. There is a sense of like selfishness, quote unquote, in there, in the sense that you want the good feeling that comes from giving somebody something else, but that is a much more productive and fulfilling way to do something we might call selfish, as opposed to just giving yourself something to indulge in, and either at the expense of other people or while simply ignoring other people. So to me, that sounded a lot like that same basic idea. Is you take that energy wanting to have a good feeling, and you make it something that's positive, as opposed to something that is either disregarding others or that is actively against other people's good. So it's very, very interesting stuff. And you
Well,
said this
and
is,
that whole thing that you just said is a very good summary of why I decided to call it the Advancing Man Project. There's a book called The Science of Getting Rich.
Mhm.
It was published in 1910. It was written by a man named Wallace Wattles. And if you haven't read it, it is, in my opinion, a must read, not just once, but like a must go back and study and decipher. And it's focused around the idea of wealth, but the principles in there apply to getting success in any endeavor that you want. And I'm reading it, and I'm applying it. And there's a chapter in there. There's, well, two chapters really that relate to this directly. One is called Increasing Life, which is, he talks about what he calls the impression of increase. And that is that if we're having a business transaction, a surefire way for my business to grow is that whatever I provide to you exceeds the money amount that you give to me in the exchange. And he has some examples in there. This is written in the 1900s. So he's like, if I take a painting that's worth $1,000, which was a huge amount of money then, and I go way up north and I convince an Eskimo to buy it from me for $500, I've ripped him off completely, and I've done him a disservice, even though the painting is worth twice as much. But if I take a rifle that I paid $50 for and I sell it to him for $100, that's a good exchange, because he can now use that rifle to earn his living as a fur trader, right? So that idea of the impression of increase exists now in the business and internet marketing world of under promise, over deliver at its base level. But like most things, if we go a little bit deeper into that, providing value, there's way more to it than someone simply getting more use value out of it, in terms of, I paid $100 for this and I'm going to go earn $1,000, use it to make $1,000, right? Base level, there's that. But if we dig a little bit deeper, what I've done is I've received compensation, and you've received something that allows you to advance. And the purpose of all life is advancement. It's growing. It's the same principle that allows the grass to grow through the cracks in the sidewalk, right? And so the next chapter after the impression of increase is the advancing man. And the advancing man is someone who so holds the impression of increase in such a way that every interaction that he has with another person, he's attempting to leave them better off than they were. And I thought, what if I completely commit myself that every interaction that I have with my child has the underlying purpose of, after this interaction, he is better in some way, or he has grown in some way, or he has advanced in some way than prior to that interaction. Mm-hmm. And so everything that I do, I have that intention behind it with my son.
Yeah, I think that's what I like about it, is that's much more of a process goal. And I think what most people, when they think of goals, they think, okay, 3 months from now, I will have accomplished X, Y, and Z. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as that endpoint, regardless of whether it happens within 3 months, is if your plan toward it is some sort of daily action, not necessarily always the same thing, but that is focused toward that goal. And so it becomes not something that you do, but something that you are. And
exactly,
if that is your focus when it comes to setting a goal, it is going to become far easier to meet or exceed what you want. And I like, I'm going to have to check this book out, The Science of Getting Rich, it's called. One of the things I mean, I know you've been like this for years too, is anytime I'm going to teach somebody, anytime I sell a course or a program or a challenge or a guide or whatever, I always wanted to lead, and this is why I was doing this. And people who are not watching on YouTube won't be able to see it, but I was like pointing, like, yes, that's always been my focus. Is I want to make it so that when people buy something from me, or they buy a service from me, or whatever it may be, they're like, I can't believe how little I paid based off how much I got back. And it's not because the stuff I sell is cheap. I think I have a tendency to sell things that are a bit more expensive, but everybody that I have interacted with who's bought something like that has always given me that impression that they felt like what they got was like basically highway robbery because of what
Yeah,
they got in return. And selfishly, that does make me feel very good. And
absolutely.
I'm making a good living. Um, I have the freedom to do the things that I want, but most importantly, I'm using the hard-won knowledge that I learned from people like you and the various other mentors and teachers that I've had in my life over the last 14 years. And I'm doing what you aim to do with your son, which is to avoid some of the mistakes and pitfalls that you came across, so that he will be able to maybe reach some new cool ones that he'll be
Hmm.
able to teach his kid to avoid. And likewise, whether it's something as important as training or as critical as raising a child, I think that sort of approach to life is an absolute must. So, dear listeners, I highly recommend you go to advancingmanproject.com, and there's going to be a link in the description so that you'll be able to very conveniently click it. And it will be, as of the time of this recording, January 24th of 2023. Will there be a recording or anything like that made for people who want to watch it later, or is that to be determined?
It's to be determined.
Okay.
Kind of depends on how it goes.
Sure.
Usually what I do is I'll have the replay up for maybe another 24 hours because in a situation in a global economy like we live in now, if I'm doing it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon my time and you live in Australia, that's like 1 in the morning or something the next day, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It's like 6 a.m. I think, depending on where you are
Yeah,
in Australia. It's or
yeah.
5 or 6, something like that. Yeah, it's a little bit of an ask, I think,
Or
for
like you and me, I'm in the States in central time zone, you're in Israel, and there's an 8 hour difference there now. So it's 11 a.m. for me and coming up on 9 o'clock for you right now, right?
7.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mathed backwards on that, didn't I?
So yeah, because you did the 10, because we started at 10. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So like, yeah. So if you're in Israel and you want to get in on this thing, then it's going to happen like 1 o'clock in the morning or something, right? Or whatever
exactly,
the time is. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So
So
more than
I do
likely,
like to have a replay up, but I don't keep it up for very long. Is
yeah,
to go back to your initial question.
yeah. So folks, you
The
can't kick the can down the road forever. You gotta attend, and you gotta
yes,
make it a point to absorb.
and the final point that I want to say before we sign off here is, as I was formulating the process and getting really dialed in on who I could best serve with this and how to best serve them, I ran across a concept online called the transitional character. And I forget who coined this phrase. It's some psychology professor somewhere or something like that. And the transitional character is a person who, within the space of a single generation, so completely alters the family belief system or the family tree that it is on a completely different course. And one person can do that. One single person can completely alter things for good or bad, but one person can do that, right? So my question for everyone, if they are dissatisfied with the relationship that they have with their kids, if they see themselves turning into the unwanted aspects of their own upbringing, that was the other thing about the guy that missed the soccer game. He's like, my dad did that to me all the time, and I don't want to be that guy. I left that part out of the story earlier. That was the thing that really drove it home for him.
Yeah.
So if you see yourself turning into the aspects of your upbringing, your parents, grandparents, school, whatever, that you do not want to pass on to your kids, you can become the transitional character. And it's not a difficult thing to do. It's quite simple. But it is also the hardest work that you'll ever do.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for some serious people who are ready to completely change the future of their family tree.
No pressure, folks. But again, keeping in mind that this is a sort of a thing that is it's a daily thing that you do. It's not do it once and then, okay, now I'm in a good trajectory. It's going to be the sort of like you said, every interaction with your son, that's your goal, is that he will be
Yep.
Better than when you started. I think that's
And here's the thing. kids need heroes. Like for me, when I was a kid, I strongly identified with the Hulk. I've told that story on this show before and like became enamored of those kind of superpowers. Because of that, I started lifting weights because of Lou Ferrigno and Arnold and all that sort of stuff. And it changed the trajectory of my life completely,
Yeah.
right? So kids that age are looking for heroes. They're looking for role models. And I decided that it was very important to me to be the number one hero that I could be for my son, because they're going to find someone, they're going to find a role model. And my question for you, Dad, is it going to be you or is it going to be some dipshit on TikTok?
Yeah. It's as simple as that. Your kids are glued to their phones, to their iPads, to the TV, to any screen imaginable. So anything that is being projected onto that screen, if you are not showing them, hey, that's how you don't act, that's who you don't want to be, that's what you don't want to do, they're going to do it.
Absolutely.
One thing that I want to say before we close out, just so that because you talked about lifting weights because of Lou Ferrigno and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I mean I think Arnold is probably one of the best examples of a transitional figure that in the public eye that most people could think of. A guy who grew up in the back. People don't realize how backwoods he is, like in terms of like in Austria. I heard this a couple months ago. Obviously, he still speaks German, but his German accent is so weird.
I heard this story too. Yeah.
Was not allowed to dub his own part in Terminator when they dubbed it into German, because his accent, it would be the same as like, I don't take this offensively, but if they were to have you dub as some sort of an accent,
hey y'all, I'll be back.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be back, y'all. It would have not had the proper effect. So this is just how like small of a town he came from. How and his dad was super strict, hated his bodybuilding stuff, and he went on to become the greatest bodybuilder of all time, the greatest action hero that the silver screen has ever seen, the governor of the state with the biggest economy in the entire United States. You don't even have to go that far, but think of things that you have done that your parents can look at, or other people in your family can look at and think, wow, he or she has really done something pretty amazing. And it even has an impact on them. If you can do that even on a small scale, even with one thing, you can absolutely do it on a grander scale over a long enough period of time. And you're going to get older anyway. The time is going to pass anyway.
Time's going to pass anyway.
You might as well get started now. Jump in with both feet. It's going to be fun. I've known Dave for a long time. I can assure you he is a laugh and a half. I know you guys have enjoyed this episode, and I have no doubt you are going to enjoy his workshop. So please go to his website, go to the link in the description, and you will be able to dive in. So put it on your calendar, January 24th, 2023. And if you do happen to be in Australia or, somewhere in Oceania or some other crazy place on the face of this planet, there will be a 24-hour replay. So you will have a chance to listen in even after that. Dave, any final words before we say sayonara, as they say in Israel?
I just want to thank you greatly for having me on the show again. It's good to connect with you again. Good to talk to you again. Good to see that beautiful face of yours. And I hope that everyone has a fantastic day.
Well, thank you very kindly. And you missed the joke because I said before we say sayonara, like they say in Israel. They definitely don't say that in Israel.
I didn't miss it. I was just answering your question. I'm focused.
Oh, okay, good. No, I appreciate that. But I wanted to make sure that people appreciated that stupid joke of mine, because I love, silly jokes like that. I'm not a dad yet, but I have to get my dad humor ready, because one day I will be, and I want to be able to, live up to the whole wearing New Balances and having dad
cargo
jokes.
Shorts, bro, jean shorts.
That's and a fanny pack. Gotta have the fanny pack. It will be the fashion of the future, folks. I promise you. So, all right. Thank you very much for coming on the show. And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.